Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today. We have Dustin Poly, who is a polymath content creator, podcast host, and knowledge management expert. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. There's a lot going on there, and hopefully we can get into as much of it as we can today.
I'm definitely down to get into as much as possible. I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. But before we do dive into everything, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
I want to sound altruistic or ego, but probably Avatar Aang from The Last Airbender.
Interesting.
I always felt like I had a bigger purpose in life, and so I wanted to. That's why I created PolyInnovator, to be the foundation, to be like all the different aspects of different careers I wanted to have throughout my life, and leading up to that big magnum opus that I felt pulled towards.
Interesting. I like that one. And, I think that everybody has a bigger purpose than they really realize sometimes. So I like that one.
It's interesting when it comes to icebreaker questions like that, because my question was always, I stole it from John Lee DeMoss, I think, back in the day. Share something about yourself that no one knows about you. And I wouldn't tell my guest about it. And I had a couple people get mad at me about it, so I got rid of it. But I always liked asking it because I felt like it made every other question afterwards easier. So icebreaker questions are good.
No, I like that one too. But after about 100 episodes, everyone uses that same question. I wonder, would there be anything they wouldn't?
Yeah, true.
Well, yeah. Well, there's always something somebody doesn't know. That's a different story. All right, let's dig into it a little bit. So, first off, the question for you is, how would you define procrastination, and what does it mean to you personally?
I see it as kind of twofold, either a lack of energy or a lack of motivation, and sometimes both, I guess you could also say too. And so during the winter time, I'm definitely very affected by SAD, the seasonal affective disorder. And so when it gets cold and when it gets gray, it messes with my ability to just have any motivation to do anything, let alone the energy to do it. And so even if I have the motivation, I may not always have the physical energy to get up, go get stuff done. And so I find myself procrastinating due to that limitation. When it comes to procrastination itself, it's interesting to think about how some people think of a challenge as too big, and so they procrastinate on it. I hate editing podcast interviews, for example. It's like the one thing in the process that I can't stand doing. I'm great at doing research. It's for one of my shows. I have to do a ton of research before someone comes on, just because how that show is operated. I love doing the calls like this because it's just natural for me to be with you here on this time. And even the marketing, like the last step, I'm really great at, or not great at, but like I like doing. It's good. But by the time I get done with the editing, I'm burned down. I don't want to do the marketing because I just have to force myself to get through it.
Interesting. And, because I have to agree, I'm sorry. I definitely hate editing the episodes after. I'm curious, though, what is your I guess, your pet peeve, or what is it about the editing process that you specifically really don't like?
I don't know. It's just a process that I don't enjoy, even with my shorter videos. I generally actually don't edit my shorter videos anymore, my solo ones, because Raw is kind of being more fancied on YouTube at this point. And so I just sit there and record, and I try not to make any mistakes. And if I do make mistakes, I might just start over. And in some cases, I might edit them and add an intro and outro or something like that. But I generally keep it pretty simple. Even with the interviews, what I generally do is find 3 highlights throughout the call that the guest is saying is something really interesting or cool, put it towards the front of the video. So the first 40 seconds is like interesting stuff that hooks people in. I transition into an 8-second animation or so that I've made, and then I have my intro that we did beginning of this call, right? And then throughout the whole process, I just cut out the ums and uhs, the pauses. And in my experience, there's like a dozen different AI tools that can help with editing. Most of them, even Riverside's, editor, are just generally not that good, and they overcut things. And so it's very janky and jarring when you're watching it. So I don't generally prefer using AI. So I do it myself, especially since sometimes the ums might be in the middle of words like that. It's really hard to cut out. Or I could be like, and that's a really easy one to cut out. Sorry, I don't know if you're going to cut it out when you're editing this or not, but it's an example, so maybe not. The point is, it's a process that it's not that complicated. I'm not doing a whole lot of fancy edits, but it's tedious.
Yep, the tedium, I get that. I definitely understand that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? It's very interesting, and I'm sure that we'd love to hear more about your journey and sort of how did you get to be where you are?
I've always found myself doing many different things. My first job was as a lifeguard. And I quickly became a swim instructor after that because I saw the teachers doing stuff and I was like, I want to do that. I want to teach. I think there was a natural call to teaching. I like teaching people, especially when it comes to swimming. I'm just naturally good at it. I feel like that's something that I just have a talent for breaking things down. And that's one reason why I like making content as well, because I get to do the same kind of thing. And so from about late 2012 or so, or early 2013, I started teaching swim lessons, and I basically have never stopped. I've done it every summer essentially since then. I used to do it all year round back in the day. And then I became a water-based instructor, personal trainer, fitness attendant, all kinds of stuff at that same facility. But beyond that, I've had over a dozen different employers, 24 different roles, and I started creating content around 12 years ago as a blogger, but I stopped around 2014, didn't pick it back up until 2017. And that's when I started doing a lot more personal brand, the PolyInnovator stuff, making podcasts, videos, blog posts, and the topics have been very wide-ranging as well.
Excellent. And what would you say would have been your sort of your biggest challenge that you had to overcome on your journey?
I think that a lot of content creators face this, but that's consistency and being able to stay relevant and keep things coming out. And I talk about this a lot on the Poly Tools channel, which is about being a modern content creator. Like, how do you do that? How do you make content? And one of the things that I took from like Roberto Blake, who's another famous creator, is like you have to do 100 reps. So whether you're making a podcast or a video or a blog post, get 100 reps, get enough experience so you know what you did right, what you did wrong, and all the learning lessons you have along the way. Same with interviews, doing 100 interviews. And it's interesting to think about anytime you might be hundreds of videos in and you switch over to blogging, you're basically brand new into that new skill. And people don't realize that your skill set level resets like that. And so when you're trying to be consistent, you need to know the habits and the skills of how to make a good YouTube video and doing it every time. And those are skills you learn after doing hundreds of reps, and be able to learn how to batch, being able to learn how to make a video more simply, do better editing and do editing quicker, right? These are all skills you learn by doing so many reps. And so now I can batch videos out and do it a lot more easily. I can crank out a blog post if I sat down and write. If I actually sit down and focus and do it, I can actually get it done. But it's just something that takes a lot of experience.
I love that you brought up consistency, and especially as it comes to content creation, I think that many business owners and many individuals just struggle with that because, how do you stay relevant? I was on a webinar recently, Neil Patel, talking about, you've got 10,000 people that are all blogging about bananas for the last 20 years, right? So how do you maintain relevancy in that market? I think that causes a lot of procrastination because, we just don't know the different angles to go through that, right?
Well, if you're like a business owner, you're spending 80% of your time on your business, 20% on the content creation. I'm like fully into content and I'm still having a hard time with procrastination. I've had over 600 reps when it comes to blog posts and hundreds of reps with videos and podcasts at this point. And it's one of those things where I've learned the systems to make it better and I'm still struggling with procrastination. And so if I'm struggling with it, I know people who are less experienced with content creation are definitely experiencing that as well.
And would you say that in your case personally, is it more about the content itself and not really knowing what to put out, or is it something different?
I've always had a list of ideas that I wanted to make, and that's kind of actually been a blessing and a curse because I have a lot of ideas I still need to get out. And I find that when I have a list, I can just choose from that list and make it pretty easily. And like, hey, today's the day I need to do it. We were talking about calendars beforehand. For a while there, I was able to kind of get away with having just like a time slot, make blog posts, and just try to spend that time doing it. It helped for a while, and using Notion actually helped a little bit better, where I was able to plan out this day I do this post, this day I do this specific post. That was probably my best experience making content, but after I moved out of Notion, I didn't have a way to replicate that. And so it's one of those things where tools can be helpful, only if you follow them and you actually use them consistently too. But yeah. Not sure that answers your questions per se, but yeah.
No, it answers the question. Thank you. And, we were going over these different tools and things. And, I think that one of the things, especially for anybody, like you said, 80% of the time you're locked away, doing other things for your business or your personal brand, whatever the case may be. 20% you're spending trying to figure out the content you're putting out. That's 100%. That doesn't leave any time to look into tools. And there's just so many. I mean, you literally listed before the show, you listed just offhand, I think it was like 10 or 15 different tools that people can use. So how can we go about maybe selecting a tool that's right for us, knowing that, there is no one size fits all?
There's definitely a point of like, if everyone likes this one tool, there's probably a reason for that. And we were talking about using Riverside beforehand. I've tried out all the other tools, and yet I still kind of default to Riverside because they've been around the longest when it comes to video recording. Like on both sides, right? The script had solo video recording, but not interviews. And Squadcast and Zencaster were podcast recording tools before. They only had audio. And it took them like 2 years after Riverside to finally get a video. And so they're all behind the development journey, if you think about it like that. And so like the issues that Riverside faced in 2021, these other tools faced in 2023. And now that we're going into 2025, these different tools had different timelines. And that's kind of the way I think about it too. Like Opus was the fastest growing tool when it comes to content creation repurposing. And content repurposing, I mean. And so like all these other tools that came out afterwards, they just can't keep up with it. Even other tools that have features like Riverside's Magic Clips, something like that. I mentioned that before. And it's just one of those things where going with the best tool in the market could be the best way for you, but it also might not be the best one. Maybe you like having the feature into a tool you already use, or maybe you need a tool that's cheaper, something like that. Your use case might be different. And so you might not have time to search for it, but if you can make time over the weekend, be like, hey, I need to spend half an hour looking for a tool, see which one works for me. And there's also creators like myself who try to make it easier for you. There's actually a website called Tool Finder that I really like, even though it's technically competitor to me, but it helps. They have a really great way of finding tools for you and like helping you break it down to like, if you have this use case or this use case, here's what you should check out.
What would you say are some of the, again, so what would you say are some of the best sources? Because again, we don't have a lot of time, maybe we go to ChatGPT, maybe we go to Perplexity.
Ask ChatGPT which tool is the best tool.
Well, yeah, just ask what is the best tool and it'll tell you, right?
I mean, that's one way to speed things up. And one thing that I also want to mention too, that people don't generally talk about, we mentioned 80-20 earlier, the Pareto principle. However, as a polymathic person, I don't quite like that as much. And I organize a lot of my life into these different areas that I call phases. And so these phases are just either disciplines that I'm working on or careers or hobbies, whatever you want to call it. Like these are just areas of focus that I'm spending my time on. And sometimes I might want to spend some time keeping the fire lit from a previous phase, or maybe sowing the seeds for the next phase so I can snowball it when I'm ready, right? But then 80% of your time is focusing on the main thing that you're working on right now. 10% on the past one, 10% on the next one, 80% on the current one. Again, kind of the 80-20 rule, except for these are split at the ends. Times I've been messing around with this a lot more over the last few years, where you might spend 33, 33, 34, split across 3 things. Like here's your business, here's your content, and here's your hobby or your family. You're spending your time in thirds that way. Or you even do 20-20, like 20, 60, 20. So 20% on your previous endeavor, 20% on your future one, 60%, so most of your time still on your current one. And trying to break it into those different ratios, I think helps some people with that as well. And so people just don't think about that option, as an option, I mean.
No, for sure. And obviously breaking it down. As you're talking about breaking it down, though, I'm curious as to how you feel about this. I mean, you tell that 10%, 10%. Now, there is that theory that, there is no such thing as multitasking. We're only ever doing one thing at the same time.
I'm pretty sure that was disproven, though. That was the thing. Like people also, multitasking has been back and forth over the last 3 decades, where people say you can, some people say you can't. Whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical makes a difference. I think there's also a matter of specialist versus generalist, too. Like how your mind operates. I think that makes a big difference, too. Sorry to interject.
No, it makes a big difference, for sure. But when you're focused on that 10%, I mean, when you're on that 10%, you're giving 100% when you're on that 10%.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so see that, yeah, that's the thing, because if we're only like 80% in and we're 10% doing something else, and we're only going to get 10% of the results.
I mean, presumably, it's a matter of just getting some steps done towards that goal. Maybe there's some things you need to build, like a website first, before you can do that next phase of your life, or something like that, or a landing page for your next business that you want to create. And so you want to get that landing page done so you can start collecting emails to build that next business. And so you don't need to spend a whole lot of your time on that. You just need to start making a page and start collecting emails, maybe do a Reddit campaign, small little projects. You can spend 10% of your time on just sowing the seeds for the next phase. You don't need to get it started right away, but you want to start doing it because you're interested in it. And so you don't necessarily want to just do just your current thing. You want to start touching that new stuff. Shiny object a little bit, but it's a matter of trying to use that shiny object as motivation rather than distraction.
Gotcha. When you're talking about being like a generalist, what has been your personal approach? Have you gone sort of with trends, or have you gone with more what interests you?
It's usually what matters interest. Like when it comes to polymathy, one of the main descriptors of a polymath is someone who's insatiably curious. And I see that generalists and jack of all trades, they're all on the same spectrum towards polymathy. And I've created content around that spectrum, something I came up with. But being a generalist is a part of human nature. And there's a lot of studies that have shown that besides this century, this last previous century of just focus on being a special cog in the wheel specialist, we've had both throughout our history. There's actually some theories that the reason why Homo sapiens evolved and not other hominins is because of this ability to adapt to new environments and different criteria to survival. And it's the generalists who were able to do that. We weren't just hunters or gatherers. We were doing both. Some people had to switch jobs and sometimes gathering would be a completely different skill in a whole new ecology and environment.
No,
That's kind of getting kind of macro there, but
no. That's actually a good an interesting thing too, because for many years, generalists have been frowned upon, right? Job jumpers, or they're unfocused, and so many words used mainly back, I guess, between like 1940 and like I don't know, it's 1990, 2000s, I guess. But like you said, if you specialized, when, we were 10,000 years ago, we were naked and afraid running through the woods or whatever, and we only knew how to hunt. And then, we went to an area.
Can't make a fire, can't make a house. Like,
yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. Where do you think that idea came from, where we had to specialize?
Henry Ford.
I'm sorry?
Henry Ford. The Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's been pretty commonly researched and discovered that like the idea of focusing on just being a narrow specialist came from the Industrial Revolution. It came from being this factory mindset, being cogs in the wheel. And we just perpetuated it over the last 100 years. And college has definitely hindered a lot of people like that. It's interesting, if you look at like what kind of degrees people are getting, interdisciplinary studies has been growing dramatically over the last decade. I think it's like 40% or more of what people get nowadays. And there's even like polytechnic schools and schools that are encouraging you to do dual discipline degrees. And if you look at like, secondary school in a lot of European countries, a lot of these schools actually train you to look at history through a math perspective, or look at chemistry through a biology perspective. They take this dualistic approach to learning. I think a lot of colleges over there do something similar as well. So it's not something that's completely out of the question. It's just interesting to think about how the US specifically has been very narrow focused. But if you look at it, like if someone who's a hyper specialist and only does one thing, they probably still have a hobby. They probably still have like being a parent is a skill. It's an area of knowledge. You have to learn how to be a parent. I'm not a parent yet, but I know that enough. I've interviewed enough parents too, especially. And it's like, that's a whole nother area of focus that you have to learn. And so you're not just doing one skill. You're being a parent, you're doing your job, you're doing your hobby, your other hobby. Maybe your career changes, so you now have a whole new career that you're doing. And we live a decent amount.
Yeah, but it raises the question too, just to see like all sides of the coin, right? So if I'm a business owner and I want to hire people, am I looking to hire more generalists, or am I looking to hire more specialists, right?
Depends on the job you're hiring for. If you're doing a creative job, you probably want a generalist. If you want a marketing job, you probably want a generalist. It actually irks me every time I see this digital marketing specialist, job listing on LinkedIn. And they want you to do SEO, pay-per-click, ads, YouTube, social media, all these different digital marketing skills that are all sometimes specialisms in their own right. And they want someone who can do all of it, at least to a certain degree. And yet their marketing and the way they describe the job listing is a specialist. And it's like, no, what you really want is a unicorn or like a generalist.
No, and you're absolutely right. And actually, Disney actually recently, I've noticed this in, I got a 12-year-old daughter, so lots of Disney in this house.
Just let it go.
Let it go. Yeah, I'm glad that one got let go. Thank you for bringing it back. Now we're going to get a bunch of other people who are going to view this podcast and say, hey, we got to start it up again. No. Okay.
Proton 3.
No, but I've noticed that a lot. Like typically when you went back, Tim, I think it was, Dick Van Dyke, he was a generalist, right? Because he could dance, he could sing, he could pretty much do it all, right? And then we sort of went away from that. I noticed, we had this period where actors were actors. They didn't necessarily dance or sing. They're just actors, right?
Actors are natural generalists anyways, because you have to act multiple different jobs. Like there was someone who I want to interview on my show. I think her handle was like Kate of all trades. And so it's kind of like Jack of all trades kind of thing. And something, or no. This is someone else. Joy Keith. It was a TED Talk. So both of them kind of reminded me of each other, but I think I found one through the other one. But there's a TED Talk, and she was talking about how she's an actor. She went into acting because she wanted to do many different things, but society and her parents told her to do just one thing, and she wanted to fulfill this desire to do many different things. So she became an actor. So through acting, she was able to be a doctor. She was able to be a pilot. She was able to be, a nurse or a barista. Like she was able to do all these different jobs because she was an actor. And through acting, she was able to do those many different things. Yeah, that was cool. Koei Keith. And yeah, I wish I could remember her name off the top of my head. Dang it.
No, that's definitely interesting and an interesting point for sure. Just from a procrastination standpoint, I'm wondering now too, like if you are a specialist, are you more likely to procrastinate than if you're a generalist when given a specific
I actually personally want to say both. I think both would actually procrastinate probably at the same amount because we're all humans. Maybe the way our brains are wired will make a difference. And I think that a lot of neurodivergent people lean towards generalism too. They like that shiny objects. And so perhaps there is like this generalist or neurodivergent difference in how many times we procrastinate, but maybe the procrastination doesn't last as long versus when a specialist gets procrastinating, they get this kind of more deeper procrastination. It takes them longer to get through it. Because there's also a matter of skill acquisition and pushing past plateaus that make people procrastinate. And I talk about this a lot because one of my first topics was education, particularly self-education. And pushing past plateaus is something a lot of people kind of avoid. And so when you're trying to do one thing and you hit that plateau, you might switch to another one. And that way you can still keep making progress. And both specialists and generalists do this. Generalists do it probably more often, but in general, people hit those plateaus and they pivot. But if you push past that plateau, you can gain that skill, that higher level. And I think that's really what's most important. And regardless of which way you lean, you should work on getting better at that. And I think that would also maybe indirectly help this issue of procrastination. Because if you're procrastinating that plateau, this happens with skill acquisition, but also problems with your business or problems with content creation. Two, getting past that plateau and procrastinating on that plateau are two angles of that same event that happens, if that makes sense. Hard to find a way to articulate it.
And it's also interesting too that just going back to your earlier comment about this digital marketing specialist, I'm wondering now if we're not being more geared towards being generalist, and with the advancement of technology, maybe it's going to favor generalists more, where we're going to use AI tools to be specialists rather than that, and then the generalists will just know how to use or program those tools to be the specialists.
I don't think you're wrong, but I think it's also a matter of like if you look at ChatGPT, there's a post I've been meaning to make for like this literally the past year, and I procrastinate on it. Actually, I don't see myself procrastinating on it. I think it's actually a matter of letting it stew in the background, let it on the back burner, because I keep having conversations like this that make me think about it differently. But ChatGPT is a generalist, not a specialist. But if you look at like Opus Clip, which is a content repurposing tool for making these interviews and the clips, it is a specialist for that feature. Same with like 11 Labs for using AI to make different voices, right? And so I think that is a way to think about it differently, where it's these different tools are coming out for specialist purposes. But then Perplexity, Gemini, ChatGPT are more generalist.
So, and just to try and mince words here again, you go back to in the future, at digital marketing, man, I just lost the word. Digital marketing specialist would have, they'd be a generalist, but they would have a specialized AI for each of those, like SEO, pay-per-click.
And presumably they would have one specialty in that like 8 description that I mentioned earlier, that like a T-shaped person. There's often the times people find a T-shaped marketer as a common kind of denominator. And so you have that one specialty with a wide range, like a jack of all trades. And so there's that kind of mindset too. By the way, I sent you the link. You can put it in the description if people want to know that TED Talk is by Ko Yeet, The Art of Living Many Lives. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because Ko Yeet had a really great talk, and I just did not want to do her an injustice.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that out after, and maybe even do like a spin-off episode on it, because it is very interesting when we look at society, as a whole, and we see again, you mentioned it before, we see this importance put on, and maybe it goes back to sort of like security and safety too, right? Because if you're a specialist in something, then that's supposed to be like the golden goose, golden egg, whatever you want to call it. Because if everybody's a generalist, then you want to go with the person that's got the most knowledge in that specific area.
Yes and no, because they're biased at that point. If you're a hyper specialist in that one area, you're only going to view the problem in that one area. So there's a book called Range by David Epstein, and one of the first examples he talks about in the book is that like this cardiology specialist, like basically the focus of the heart, like that's what his specialty is. It's like cardiology, whatever, right? And so the quote is, the best time to get a heart, or like to see if I have a heart problem, is when all the cardiologists are away at a conference. So you can see if the heart is actually the problem. If you think that, talk to cardiologists, they're going to say, it's the heart that's the problem, I'm going to operate on it, and that'll fix your problem. But if you talk to a general practitioner, they might realize, I can see why he thinks it's the heart, or she thinks it's the heart, but it's actually something to do with the liver that's affecting the heart. And that's just an effect that's happening because of that. Without seeing the bigger picture of the general practitioner, cardiologist will make you have heart surgery that's super invasive when it's actually not going to help you. So it's just a matter of like, there's also a matter of bias too, you have to be accounted for.
Gotcha. And the bias as a generalist is going to be less because you're not retaining as much information as a specialist.
I think the bias for a generalist is that it's not actually, there's not really much of a bias for generalists. It's more of an issue of like, hey, if there is a specific issue that like only a specialist would know, if you're looking at, okay, there's a specific condition of the heart that only the top 20% of cardiologists actually know about, or doctors know about, maybe the top 10%, because it's just something that only happens 1 in a million times, but you somehow have that one problem, then only the specialist is going to know about it, right? So there's purpose for both, generalist and specialist. There's purpose for having both.
So could you then be a specialist in being a generalist?
That's what a T-shaped person is, or an expert generalist in some cases too. I can show you the spectrum if you want.
No, yeah, by all means. If you got something you want to throw up on the screen, yeah, just, look at it too. Feel free. It's open.
I think this visualization is really helpful because it helps people kind of anchor towards a certain term. And so if you feel like you are procrastinating because you don't necessarily know what you want to do, it could be that you're more of a generalist person. So perhaps that will help you.
Interesting.
So I need to work on this a little bit more because I haven't like remade it this year, but I need to remake it for next year. But you start off with this multi-potentialite term, potential to do many different things. I feel like that's kind of the starts where you have like this ability to go into many different aspects, but you haven't spent a whole lot of time doing it. And then as we're kids growing up, we spend more and more time being more of a novice or adept at certain skills, maybe like a dozen different skills, kind of jack of all trades level. And then you kind of split off. You have either a T-shaped person, which you have like a single specialty, but maybe you haven't spent enough time to be considered a full expert into it. You could be like a journeyman in that one skill. And then you have a wide range underneath it. So that's the T-shape. That's where the unicorn employee that people look for at these different companies are. But you also might dabble around in a lot of different areas and decide, oh, I really like this one skill. That's what happened with Roger Federer, the famous tennis player. He played a dozen different sports before he finally settled on tennis. And so he became a specialist. So he's still T-shaped, but he got really into tennis and got hyper specialist into that. And so he's probably more like this at this point. But I would probably consider him more in this regard. He could be either one. I'm not on a tangent though. But if you were to keep following that generalist path where you have 12 different skills, you spend a decent amount of time in each of them, but not enough to really be an expert in. You go into generalist and get more medium level in about 5 different skills, 6 different skills. Eventually, you spent enough time, became an expert in 3 or more different areas. That's the polymath right there. There's a lot of other adjacent terms that kind of fit into it, but this is the thing that came up.
And there we have the labels I was talking about.
Well, like, I love these different labels too, because there's like the dual specialist, there's the T-shaped person, there's the expert generalist, multi-passionate, so many different ways of explaining it. And I wanted to give a way to have people anchor to it. Like some people really like multi-passionate for whatever reason. And so I wanted people to have a place they can anchor themselves to. And that way they can see that there's a progression that you can go towards. I think that helps with procrastination as well. When you have a goal in mind, like you said, that why, it helps you like, oh, I want to become a polymath. That's my why. I want to work towards that goal because I have 3 different skills I want to work towards, but I'm doing so much right now. I can start focusing more, nailing down onto that. And I think that as a personal trainer, one of my first lessons I taught myself when teaching clients was that I always want every person to make 1% progress every time, at least. And if you make that 1% progress, you're pushing forward because you're either going up or going down. There's no maintaining. There's no stable. If you want to stabilize, you need to make that tiny bit of progress to stay where you're at. And so that's one thing I want to kind of talk about too, because I think that's how you get past procrastination, where it's like making that 1% progress is the opposite of procrastinating, right?
No, for sure.
continuing forward.
No, for sure. Also, just in terms of personal fitness, I mean, that's always going to be generalist too, right? Because you're going to be working your arm, your upper body and lower body. Because I mean, if you skip leg day at the gym, well, some people are specialists
Like,
in upper body and some people are specialists in lower body, but
there's a gender difference too. It seems like a lot of women generally gravitate towards legs and a lot of men gravitate towards arms, but you do want to do both. And there's actually this thing called the mirror muscles. All the muscles you can see in the mirror, like the pecs, the biceps, the abs, the front of the legs. And it's just funny to think about, like, you have to do both sides. You have to do your backside too.
oh, okay. I don't think I'm looking at my backside of the mirror too much.
But that's the point. Like, people don't think about it because you don't see it in the mirror, right?
Is that something that like when, working with clients as a personal trainer, is that something that you go through as well? That the mirror and the other ones as well?
It's just something to point out, right? It's like people procrastinate on the back or the back of the glutes because they forget that they exist. And so that's kind of like object permanence is kind of another reason why people procrastinate too. Like, they just don't remember it, I feel like. That's why I brought it up.
How could you not remember the glutes? You're using them all day.
You'd be surprised.
Like, I mean, every time I get up from my chair, I remember them because it's like I've either been sitting too long or,
Well, that just kind of comes with age, to say. Sorry to say. Once you hit 30,
shots
you're what,
fired.
32 maybe?
Shots fired. He just called me old. Wow.
No. I grew up teaching water aerobics. All my clients in those classes were, 70 and 80 and whatnot, or even late 60s. So I grew up around that. You're not old.
But even water aerobics is very, I mean, it's kind of specialist, but I mean, it's generalist in terms of the actual exercise.
Yeah, and I actually took a more strength training approach to my classes too. A lot of people think water was just kind of like just moving around in the water, dancing, which some classes are like that. But even the cardio-centric classes that I taught were pretty dramatic in the amount of exercises, not dramatic, wide-ranging in the amount of exercises that we were doing. And then I took a more strength training approach in there too. So some of the exercises I would tweak to focus more on strength and endurance and pushing the muscles, which a lot of the ladies actually, because there was a majority of ladies in these classes, but men too. Pretty unisex, but it was just one of those things where a lot of ladies would actually gain a lot of progress because they didn't focus on strength training as much. They procrastinated on strength training because they focused more on cardio. They thought the cardio is how they're going to lose weight or, gain muscle. I was like, no, you need to switch it. So I digress.
No, but that's interesting as well because, again, I'm no expert in that for sure. It's been said that as you get older, and especially for women that are approaching like menopause, perimenopause, they do weight training as a way to actually build muscle and, prevent bone loss and all that other stuff.
Yeah, the bone density. It's not even just walking outside the pool is a big deal because a lot of the people actually go into the pool because they have some like surgery on their knee or back, something like that, and they need the water pressure to relieve it. And then they get in the habit of walking in the pool, but then they don't get the bone density aspect. It takes the pressure off the joints, sure, but you actually need that pressure for bone density. So it's actually kind of counterintuitive for some people. They spend so much time in the pool, they actually lose that bone mass. And so there's a balance to it as well. And regardless of man or woman, there's actually a lot of situations where there's a dramatic decrease in testosterone across different generations, no less, even my generation at this point. And it's interesting to think about how you need to start focusing on that even in their 20s. Like I'm late 20s, but I've actually been, trying to be conscious of my prostate and taking care of my testosterone, which I know is not like an issue that I have to face right now, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to start hitting. And both men and women have a profound testosterone loss when they hit around like 45, 50. And that directly impacts your ability to build muscle and hormonal balance and emotional balance.
Well, I think you're probably right just by the, I remember, dating myself. Remember, 20 years ago, we didn't really have a lot of adult, for lack of a better word, diapers, I guess, Tenna or whatever it's called. And now I've noticed that they're starting to market to younger and younger and younger generations. Like, hang on a second, wait, what?
That's true, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, though. I didn't realize.
You didn't. Well, again, if you're in your 20s, you're not going to know you're not going to know what was in the shelves, 20 years ago. But
I mean, I have seen those Depends and stuff like that.
yeah, and it just floors me. But I mean, you're right. I mean, one of the biggest things we procrastinate in those, and wow, this podcast has really gotten off track.
I was thinking about that. I was like, I hope, Chris, that you can bring it back.
No. It's
people
good.
come here for procrastination.
Well, this does tie into procrastination. And since you are a fitness trainer and you talk about those forgotten exercises, Kegels.
And one thing that I try to think about too is I take a generalist approach when it comes to exercise. And this was actually kind of a way for me to get around procrastinating on doing legs, for example, or doing certain exercises that I might not normally think about. I tried to create a system that revolved around a certain amount of muscles or groups. So I came up with what I call the trifecta. I think someone else came up with it too. So it's not just unique to me, but I try to market it in a different way to make it easier for people to remember. The trifecta is push-ups, pull-ups, and squats. You do those 3 exercises, you're going to get most of the muscles in the body, right? So you get, and generally the push-ups are going to get more of the mere muscles. The squats are going to get the glutes, which are just really important for balance. And actually, there's a lot of studies that talk about the importance of leg movement and actually pushing through the lymphatic system and just a lot of health benefits doing squats. And the pull-ups are helpful too because it allows you to, first off, save yourself from hanging off a cliff. That's always motivated me. But also helps get the back, it helps get the shoulders, it helps get the neck. And then I call the reverse trifecta. Instead of push-ups, you do dips. Instead of pull-ups, you're doing chin-ups, which again are doing more mere muscles, but you're getting different angles. Instead of squats, you do lunges. And so by just doing the first 3, let alone the first 6 of all this stuff, you get all the muscles that you really need in the body for the most part. You get all of its body weight. So if you have a hard time with strength or you're getting new to it, you can do most of those muscles or most of those exercises, given a certain adaptation. Maybe you can't pull yourself off the ground, but keep your feet on the ground, get a low bar and do pull-ups like that. Less intense. Instead of doing push-ups on the floor, do push-ups against the counter. There's ways of changing it. You can do all those exercises right now. Just adapt them to your level. And this helps get people that 1% progress, like I mentioned before, and continuously improving.
No, you bring up a very good point too, is that a lot of people procrastinate on going to the gym because they think it involves, always lifting a big amount of weight or always, hitting the treadmill for like 2 hours, and nobody really likes that idea, right? But hey, I can go, I can walk up to my wall and I can push off against it, 5 or 10 times, no problem. How many of us, as children or otherwise have, sort of balanced ourselves on chairs as kids or, pushed up on like countertops and things, right? So there's that. Just going into the physical fitness, one of the prime examples of a generalist, I think, and you may agree, you may not agree. Well, we'll see. Bruce Lee, would you consider him a specialist or would you consider him a generalist? Just knowing his history and how he approached things.
It's funny because I actually have a post that I want to make about him at some point. And again, it's on the back burner because there's a lot of angles I need to take in that post. He has a quote that says, he would not fear a person who's done 1,000 kicks one time. He fears the person that does one kick 1,000 times. So it would appear through that quote that he's more of a specialist mindset. And maybe he was. But I think through his actions, he was an actor, he's a martial artist, he's a teacher. He did a lot of different things. He's a philosopher, honestly, at that point too. I would consider his actions, and by the time he passed away, he was definitely more polymath.
No, for sure. And I just use him because he's been a big inspiration to a lot of people. And he actually took, and like you said, like we were discussing before, the duality, you can't say duality, but he took a lot of different arts and he took what he considered the best pieces and he put them all together.
Be like water, my friend.
Be like water. Frozen.
No, it's Bruce Lee.
Anyway, this has been a great conversation. Honestly, went off in a different direction than I thought it was going to, but there's a lot of great information here, a lot of awesome things. Do you think that there's anything, as we're approaching time, do you think there's anything that I should have asked or could have asked that I didn't ask?
One of the reasons why I started going on different shows again as of recently is that I came up with my PIOS system, this framework, the PolyInnovation operating system, which is a replacement to the para method or the second brain ideology that's come out in the last decade or so. Because there was the get things done methodology back in the day too. The para method's pretty old at this point. All those methods had been built before these new tools came out. I wanted to create a system that was based around, for polymaths and generalists, right? There was no system for us. But there was also a matter of even generalists, even specialists can use my PIOS too. And I wanted to make a system that was adaptable to any tool that you want to use. I use Obsidian. You could use Notion. You could use Airtable. You could use whatever you want, capacities. And this framework allows you to keep track of things at a different level. So you have the yearly, the quarterly, the monthly, the weekly, the daily. And I think that is a helpful way of organizing your structure to help procrastination. Because if you are procrastinating on the daily, then you can keep track of that on the weekly and then try to make sure on the monthly layers you're planning around that. Maybe there are certain points in the week where you have a dip because of your job. So your dip of energy makes it harder for you to get things done. So you end up procrastinating because you have lack of energy, right? So you can plan around that on the bigger scale. This is one example.
Interesting. I don't suppose you have any visual representation of how that looks.
Hey, yes, I do. Let me open up.
Yeah, because I think that would be really good. Really interesting for us to see, for those of us who are more visual.
You might have to cut this out. Sorry, it's not opening up.
No, man. It's all
whatever
authentic.
reason.
It's not getting cut.
I don't want people waiting for me to get this load because for some reason the app is not working.
Yeah, but they know that it's authentic, and that's what people want. I mean, you said so yourself. That it's interesting. The algorithms want authenticity.
I also don't want to bore people. Oh, they don't want to bore people while they wait.
That's too late. Once you take a 1-second pause, they're gone.
So we have the yearly layer, which starts off with organizing those phases that I mentioned before. Those are different areas of focus that you are attending to. So for me, like my swimming stuff, my PolyInnovator brand, the PolyTools brand, and other hobbies as well. I also use this time to probably plan out the quarters ahead of time. I'm still kind of getting used to this part of this PIOS because I'm still building it out. And then the yearly notes. So each layer has its own notes. And so what I'm actually doing right now is actually after this call, I'm probably going to work on the last part of the yearly note. The way I approach it is that you review the year before, and then you're planning the year ahead. So what did you do right, and what did you do wrong? What did you forget to do or not finish? You can plan it again this year. Quarterly, this is where it gets a little bit different than some of the other methods. I talk about the body, mind, spirit, and emotion, which are my 4 pillars. And then there's also ikigai, which is a whole nother concept. It's a whole nother tangent. People can look it up. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But basically, the quarterly layer allows you to align. Like, are your actions aligned with what you want to do? And so you have your exercise plan, the learning that I mentioned earlier, the self-education, meditation for just brain and overall spirituality, emotions like gratitude journal, stuff like that. I'm kind of skimming over this pretty quickly, but I have videos that explain it more in depth. The monthly layer is where you break down those phases that I mentioned before. The phases are your areas of focus. Each phase will have its own projects and goals and tasks. And then you have your monthly notes, keeping track of what you've been doing. So weekly is where you get into the habits and systems. So you kind of keep a track of, are you doing your habits? They always say you don't rise to the level of your habits, you fall to the level of your systems, right? This is where you kind of keep track of that. And you might have some databases here for that. Finally, you have the last 2 layers, which are the daily. The daily is where I do my daily journal, so the notes, as well as my content, which is a very complex system itself. So I needed a place for it. The networking base is my CRM for people. So I keep track of who I meet, or at least I try to. That way I can kind of remember, like, when did I talk to this person, stuff like that. And then you have the templates folder and archive and stuff like that. Basically it.
Interesting.
Questions?
Interesting. Definitely love that. Especially coming into the new year, I've always believed that the new year is kind of arbitrary and that we should always be working around the clock anyway. But
throw your New Year's resolution out the window.
Throw what out the window?
New Year's resolution.
No. I have made one resolution in the last, I think, 20 years, and I've kept it. And that resolution was to not do resolutions.
I like it. Resolutions don't really work out.
And I've had this conversation.
Besides that one, that one's kind of like meta, but like most of them, people fail to resolution.
Well, yes, and you're absolutely right about that, right? Now, just from a productivity angle and a procrastination angle, why would you think that?
There's a lot of studies that showed that, like, when you are setting a New Year's resolution, you are setting a time limit on that resolution. So that time limit basically indicates, like, hey, at the end of January, maybe at the latest February, it's no longer a New Year's resolution. That was your goal. You did your goal. Now you can stop. And you kind of have that excuse to stop. Versus like just making a new habit at that same time. You could do a New Year's resolution habit. Just don't call it that. Don't mentally check yourself off as a New Year's resolution to say, hey, you know what? This year I'm going to start doing new habits. And so going forward, I make this new workout habit. I don't care about New Year's. I might not even do it until February so I can beat the crowd. Whatever. Mindset.
No, interesting. I always love asking people that because, and actually what you said makes a lot of sense. I think you're the first person that's actually mentioned that. A lot of people tend to think that it's because, you get caught up in the euphoria or you take on a narrative that's really not yours. You take on a resolution that's, well, everybody else is saying they're going to go to the gym and do whatever. So I guess I should do that too.
I mean, I worked at a gym for 11 years, so I saw all these New Year's resolutioners come and go.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely one of those. I mean, I bought a gym membership, and
the hardest part of the gym members, they say the heaviest weight that you have to move when you go to the gym is the front door.
Oh yeah, I definitely believe that, especially in January if you're in a colder country or colder climate. Like, nah.
Before we go, maybe I should just mention this. This is something I learned a while back. If you want to start going to the gym, don't do anything. Right? You sign up for the membership. You go there. you walk around and you don't lift any weights. You just look around and you leave. And the next week, maybe later in the week, depending on how often you want to go per week, maybe 3 times a week or whatever, you do it 3 times. The next time you might look at the weights, maybe pick one up, put it back down, walk around if you want, and then leave. And the point is, by doing that for a few weeks on end, you build that habit of going. That's way more important than actual lifting the weights and the exercise that you're doing. And eventually, after the first week, you might lift the weight a few times and get a feel for it. The next week, you do an actual workout, but it's very light, and you snowball it that way.
Yeah. I would add one thing to that though. Don't take your phone with you. Or if you take it, stay off the social apps, because otherwise you're just gonna get into the habit of going to the gym to look at your Instagram, which I see a lot of.
That's a negative habit stack. Yeah. I only bring my phone with me for music anyways, but I don't generally check social media when I'm at the gym, but I've done it long enough to where I don't have to be distracted by it. But music is definitely very helpful for me when I'm in the gym. But just get like a cheap MP3 player at that point.
Those still exist.
Yeah, believe it or not.
Interesting.
Or use an old phone that doesn't have any socials.
But then it probably also wouldn't play music.
Download playlists.
Interesting. Anyway, this has been a really good conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. What is the best way for people to reach out in case they have questions about, the Polymath or the PolyInnovator tools there?
So I mentioned a few different sites. I have a few different sites. I mean, I mentioned a few different things today, but the things I mentioned, you can mainly find on polyinnovator.space. That's my name. You can find me on any platform. Like, I actually kind of make that a challenge. Is there a platform besides OnlyFans that I'm not on? Tell me so I could be on that platform. And so you can find me on social media that way, PolyInnovator on every platform, or you can go to polyinnovator.space. I sent you a link to, by the way, that you can use for the PIOS. And so that way, like, if you want to check out the PIOS particularly, there's a tag. You can look at all the posts for it.
Excellent. And to all our listeners, don't worry about grabbing a pen and paper or whatever. This is going to be in the show notes, so you'll be able to find it really quick in the description. And thank you once again for tuning in as well. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation for someone else.
Yeah, and don't forget to like and heart subscribe.
Like and heart subscribe. Oh, that just cheapens it though.
I'm the guest. I can get away with it. If you do it, it's a little bit more cheesy. But if I do it, it's not as bad.
Sure enough. Okay, well, thanks so much. And and Happy New Year, and we'll see you again.